I'm constantly approached by designers asking me for tips on how to actually freelance for other designers and for clients. I've put together a little guide for you so that you can have some really easy steps to follow to hopefully get you on your first freelance gig or start your little side hustle. So if you're a designer that's working full time and potentially have said no to a couple of opportunities, friends, family, colleagues, this might be something that you're interested in watching. So here it is, your freelance guide to interior design. Step 1, you need to determine whether or not you're actually freelancing for a client or for a designer. The reason this is important is because this is actually going to be how you structure your contract and your fees. Okay, so if it's for a client, you're obviously going to have to be a little bit more formal, where you'll be putting together terms and conditions and a fee proposal that's a little bit more structured. When you're freelancing for another designer, it might be a little bit more casual. The agreement might even be made via email. It's also going to potentially impact your liability. Obviously, when you're working for another designer, you might actually have you're working under their insurance and under their banner. When you're actually working for a client, you'll have to take that insurance out yourself, so make sure that you're covered for that. Step number 2 is to determine your scope of services. If you're working for a designer, think about whether or not you're just assisting them or whether they're expecting you to lead the project. Obviously, for an actual client, you'll be leading the project. So the scope that you'll actually need to include will outline exactly what you're responsible for and what you're going to deliver. So it can be anything from taking a site measure, going to meetings, doing documentation, specifications. Are you expected to go to weekly site meetings? This is actually then going to determine also how you set up your fee structure. Number 3 is working out how much you're actually going to charge. And this is the million-dollar question that every designer wants to know. And unfortunately, there's no actual answer. You can use the DAA guidelines to determine your average hourly rate. I would suggest this. You basically need to look at what the hourly rate is for the actual scope of services that you're providing. So if you're assisting, obviously that's going to be different than if you're actually a senior designer. But then I want you to take into account the fact that when you're freelancing, you actually have overheads that you don't have when you're working for someone else. So what I mean by this is you're expected to have your own computer, your own software, you'll need to have insurance, you'll need to have your own car or transport, yeah? So you need to take those expenses into account. So I always say to everybody, tell me what you want to get paid per hour, add another 30%, that's where you're going to start. Sometimes you'll get clients and designers ask you for a lump sum fee. And what this is basically your hourly rate times the amount of hours that you're estimating it's going to take you to do this project. And while you're starting out, this is a little bit unknown, so you're going to maybe have to take a stab in the dark and actually sit down and work out how many hours you're predicting. The way that I get around this is I usually put a clause in my actual proposal that says this is an estimate, and if I go above and beyond this amount or the amount of hours, that I'll ask for approval or I'll seek approval to move forward. Now, a little tip is actually when you start freelancing, start keeping a log of how many hours it takes you to do things. So when you get to your next project, you're not guessing, you're actually going back to a document that actually tells you how much time you've spent doing your research or doing your FF&E schedule or whatever it is that you need to be doing for your clients. So start logging those hours. I know it's annoying and it's probably the last thing we want to do. Bookkeeping designers hate it, paperwork, but you have to get into the habit so that you can start to track this so that when you're making your estimates per hour, that they start to become more tangible. There obviously is other ways to do project fees, and we talk about that in our workshops and also in our online courses. For a freelancer, I think let's stick to the hourly rate, add your percentage on top to make sure that you're covered, and that should give you a good starting point to get your fee proposals and start getting some money. So step number 4 is when are you going to get paid? So regardless of whether you're working for a designer or a client and you've actually put together a little contract, or whether it's literally just in an email communication with the designer, you need to state when you expect to get paid. So if you're suggesting that you're doing it an hourly rate and the project is quite quick, you might suggest that you get paid at the end of the project. So the expectation is that I would send you an invoice at certain periods. So at the end of the project, after the first week, every week, whatever you think is actually suitable for the scope of services. Sometimes I'll actually align my schedule of payment with the actual scope of services. So I might do the schematic design, conceptual ideas, and then invoice after that's been approved, and then I'll get into the documentation, and once I've actually issued documentation, I'll then invoice again, and then the next stage obviously would be execution and being on site, and then I could invoice again. So again, depending on whether the project is large or small, you might determine whether or not one invoice or 4 invoices or 5 are appropriate. But make sure that you actually do include that in your contract or your email to be clear. You don't want to be sitting there saying, oh, well, when do I actually get paid? Okay, so step number 4, make sure that you include a payment schedule. So we've determined that you need to, step 1, work out whether you're actually working for a client or a designer. Step 2 is working out the scope of services and responsibility. Step 3 was determining your fees and making sure that we cover ourselves for our costs. Step 4 is making sure that we include a payment schedule so that we can actually invoice. So I'm assuming at this stage that you will have your ABN set up. If not, that's probably the very first thing you need to do. There's a really, it's a really easy process. It doesn't cost you anything. We'll include a link below to the government site that you can actually get on there and get that sorted. And the other thing I just need to say is get yourself a really good accountant. Start having the conversation now about how making money on the side and your side hustle might impact your tax returns at the end of the year. So get yourself a good accountant. That's not my thing. I'm a designer, not here to give any legal advice. So I hope this guide has been helpful in setting you up on your journey for freelance, for your freelance career.